Very excited to conclude this webinar series today. And with that, I'll hand it over to my co-host, Dr. Devin Vidichka.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I guess maybe good evening, depending on where you are in the world. It's great to again see such a international group of participants. So hello to all of our attendees. And as I mentioned, I'm Devin Vidichka, co-founder, co-CEO of Learner Centered Collaborative. I am so excited to be joined by two incredible leaders here with us today to talk about distributed leadership. First, from Hampton Township in the Pittsburgh area of Pennsylvania, say hello to Michael Lawhead. Great. And also with us, the dynamic and inspirational leader from Lamont Elementary School District in Kern County, California. Good morning, Lori. All right. And then I'm also thrilled to be joined by my colleague, Brittany, from Learner Centered Collaborative. Brittany's done a tremendous job organizing this webinar series. And so I'm going to do a little bit of just introduction, and then we'll move into panelist conversation. But to begin with, at Learner Centered Collaborative, we envision education ecosystems where all learners know who they are, thrive in community, and actively engage in the world as their best selves. And it is this broader view of success that motivates and inspires us to think about our role as leaders and how we can organize ourselves through distributed leadership to really co-create and co-design these ecosystems where we have this sense of self and thriving relationships and our ability to be our best selves in the world. So through this webinar series on distributed leadership, today is the culmination of our four-part series. We started with why distributed leadership now, talked about the dynamism of the world around us and the importance of shifting to more collaborative structures. We connected distributed leadership with our learner-centered ecosystem framework and the enabling conditions. And then we did some asset mapping to identify the strengths and bright spots in our communities that we could build from and with. And today we're going to be talking about bringing the big idea to life. And so we have heard from an incredible group of leaders. First in our series was we had Contessa Orr, who's a superintendent from Kentucky, along with Andy Johnson, a superintendent in San Marcos, California. And that conversation really centered on some work from Heifetz around the dance floor and the balcony and the importance of balancing perspectives. And we also talked about the difference between a technical problem and an adaptive challenge and what that implies for us as leaders. In the next section, or the next session, excuse me, we heard from Luis Ibarra, the superintendent of Escondido School District in San Diego County, California, and from Chad Maybury, who's the assistant sup in Laguna Beach. And they talked about how the enabling conditions have been important focus areas for their work with distributed leadership as they've thought about systems change and systems transformation over an extended period of time. From there, we last week heard from a team of our colleagues at UC San Diego who've been collaborating with us in a partnership with National School District, also in San Diego County, California. And here we talked about the importance of empathy, getting input, and also really embracing this dual operating system model that Kotter talks about, the hierarchy as well as these adaptive agile networks. And it's been an incredible series. And so today, we want to make sure we're thinking about our outcomes practically and experientially. On the practical side, we've done a self-assessment tied to the enabling conditions in this series. And if you're new to the series, let us know and we'll reshare that assessment for you. We've done the asset map, and today's about creating a plan. How do you bring to life the ideas that we're hearing about from our panelists so that you can activate distributed leadership to sustain the change journey ahead? And then experientially, connectedness and community are important. We want to make sure we're hearing your questions and your ideas. We want you to feel like you're a trusted leader and that you're more prepared to trust others to lead. So that's what we hope to achieve. And in terms of the flow, I'm doing a little bit of the framing right now. We'll move shortly into interviews with our amazing panelists. Then we'll have some time in breakout rooms and come back together as a group for reflection and closing. So in terms of distributed leadership, again, just to sort of frame it up, I had the great privilege to earn my doctorate in organizational leadership. And in the course of my studies and through my own journey as a leader, really came to identify this learner-centered leadership, which orients around purpose, participation, and feedback. And at the intersection of purpose and participation, you have shared vision. Participation and feedback is where you get collective efficacy. And then if you're individually purposeful and using feedback, you develop your own competence. And the intersection of all of these is where we see learner-centered leadership occurring. And when we have introduced that model, I try to reinforce that there's no titles associated with the intersection of purpose, broad participation, and using feedback to move to your destination for the future. And so any of us can exercise leadership regardless of the role that we play. And as I mentioned, we've also looked at Heifetz. Heifetz is it's a hard one to do in the plural. We've looked at the model from Heifetz on technical and adaptive challenges. And we talked about how when it's a known problem with a known solution, that's a technical problem, where you can focus on consistency in the process and have confidence you're going to get to the outcomes you're trying to achieve. But when it's an adaptive challenge where the problem and the solution are unknown, then it's about engaging others in a collaborative process where the outcomes are clear, but we embrace flexibility in the strategies and actions to get to that outcome that we're trying to achieve. And in the world today, we're more and more confronted with adaptive challenges as leaders, which compels us to really engage collaboratively in a distributed leadership model. I've mentioned, throughout this series that it is really helpful for us to go back to our learner-centered ecosystem framework, which embraces an ecological model of change. And this also speaks to the interconnectedness of what's happening when we think about outcomes and learning experiences and school design and enabling conditions and culture, and how these all intersect and connect to one another. And so when we think about distributed leadership, we want to be thinking about it in the context of trying to get to broader outcomes and shifting the learning experiences, redesigning schools, and creating the conditions for this to be occurring in a sustainable and enduring way. And as we know, every interaction that we have also shapes the culture, the relational trust, the collective efficacy, and our mindsets. We've also talked about these enabling conditions, the importance of coherence and having clarity of frameworks. I think you're going to hear that from our panelists today, the activation of commitment, the alignment of our various systems, how we think about cultivating talent development and growth, and then how important partnerships are as we also think about distributed leadership. We have talked about dual operating systems. I think just, a quick thing to say on this is it is hard for leaders to operate with one foot in each world. And so as you listen to the journey from Hampton Township and Lamont, hopefully we'll hear some insights and tips about how these incredible superintendents are managing to exist in both of these realities. And then the last framework that I want to introduce for this conversation is just how change happens, and change in social settings tends to follow this Rogers adoption curve. And Everett Rogers was a sociologist who studied the diffusion of innovation in social systems. And what he found was that in most settings, there are a very small number of individuals who just jump in and try new things. And they might be characterized as innovators or early adopters, but their tolerance for ambiguity tends to be pretty high. and they tend to like the creative problem solving that occurs at the front edges of a change process. But most of us, in most circumstances, are in the majority, this majority in the middle that kind of watch and wait, and they see if the tinkering and the innovation from those innovators and early adopters actually works. And if it works, that majority in the middle tends to be very fast to embrace the change. And in most communities, there is this tail end, which is sometimes called the laggard resistors, but this is a group that is often slowest to embrace the change. And sometimes they occupy the most attention from leadership. Um, but one of the other things that Rogers, points out is that there tends to be a chasm between these innovators and early adopters and the majority in the middle. And so what we know about the dynamics of the diffusion of innovation is that when you have high levels of social connectedness, high levels of relational trust, that the insights from that front edge do translate to the majority in the middle. And so when you have those densely connected networks, the change process sometimes looks slow, because it goes from those innovators and early adopters to the majority in the middle who have been watching, waiting, but also listening and learning through the social connection. And so, again, as we listen to the stories and the journeys from Hampton and from Lamont, I want you to be thinking about the intentionality that these leaders have taken into the change process and how they've incorporated frameworks like the Rogers Curve and Kotter's model and Heifetz's adaptive leadership model into the strategy that they have. So, last thing I'll say, Darcy, clarity of roles can be really helpful, and I'll be very fast on this, but just when you're going through the fog, the blurriness of a big change effort, identifying clear roles and responsibilities is one way to move through that neutral zone. And so we use the Darcy framework. There are other models as well, but being very clear about who's making decisions, who's accountable for the change, who's responsible for contributing, who's consulted, who's all of these things can help to just build confidence in the direction change. All right, so from there, we're going to jump into hearing from our panelists. And I want to start with just like quick intros. And Lori, if you don't mind going first, just who are you, where are you, and tell us about your role. And then we'll have Michael do the same. Michael will kind of walk through his change journey, and then we'll bring it back to you, Lori. But can you just introduce yourself first, Lori?
Sure, absolutely. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening. I am Dr. Lori Gonzalez, and I am the very proud superintendent of Lamont Elementary School District. We are in the Central Valley in California, about 2,600 students. I am a pre-K 8 district, 4 school sites. One is our middle school, and lots of construction going on, so hoping to build a new school soon. And I'm an educator is what I am. I started as a teacher and will always be a teacher. And I think that that's the biggest part of this entire journey is not forgetting where you started and how important it is to connect with others. So glad to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lori. And Michael, would you mind just introducing yourself? Tell us who you are, where you are, and then I know you've got some slides to kind of walk us through the Hampton journey.
Be glad to. Wonderful to be here with everyone, particularly with Lori. We had a chance to work together, gosh, a couple years ago now. But it's great to be in an opportunity to share and to talk about the future and how we're getting there. So here at Hampton, it's a rather, I'd say, established school district. Actually goes all the way back to being founded in 1862 with the first one-room schoolhouse here in Hampton Township. We've actually got a record of that and a teacher or two being paid from our tax records in the township. Fast forward to where we are now, about 3,000 students. It's a K-12 district. We have 3 elementary schools, kind of neighborhood schools. They're not as many as those there used to be, but we've got 3 nice neighborhood schools, traditional middle school, and 9 through 12 high school. So very proud to be here at Hampton. I've been here for 10 years, and this district has had a long reputation of excellence, but not necessarily a district that was apt to change. There was a lot of tradition of excellence was the tagline when I came here, which I tried to flip and say, no, we have an excellence tradition. We don't want to rest on the tradition. We want to look at excellence, and that means change. So we're a pretty stable community, not a lot of in and out in terms of folks coming and going. Folks love it here. They raise their kids here. They stay here. And we wish sometimes they would move and allow other people to come into the community to keep it a little more vibrant. But, the love of the schools and of the educational program here is one of the best I've ever experienced. But with that comes the challenge of change because folks hold on to what they really participate and enjoy. But I think we've made progress there, which I'll be excited to share with you.
Yeah. And, before you jump into that, I do want to say for our participants, I to visit both Hampton Township and Lamont. And these are vibrant learning communities where, students and educators are just engaged and inspired, and it's the real deal. And so, as you hear the stories of the change process, I want you to imagine the potential that exists in many communities, and know that these are 2 systems that have gone deep into that change process and have done some really transformational work. And so, Michael, maybe start with the Talbot and the portrait of a Talbot, and what happened there, and how did that spark the beginning of a really incredible process?
That really was the genesis for transformation here in Hampton. We had a wonderful mission statement when I came here, but there was a lack of a sense of urgency for change and moving to the future. We did that through our portrait of a Talbot, which is our portrait of a graduate. And the genesis of that was kind of bringing together community leaders, business leaders, our board, faculty, staff, and our leadership team, and really felt that if we could land on a portrait that was viable and bring it alive, it could make change happen. And right here is our mascot is a Talbot, which is an unusual extent hunting dog. But what it really allowed us to do is to say, what does that embody? What are these 6 competencies that make Hampton special, and how do we bring them alive? So we spent a whole summer and a fall creating the competencies, and spent the first year really explaining what they were to our community, which was the very first step. And that went reasonably well. I think that there was a sense of, well, I understand what collaboration is. In fact, 3 of these were in our mission statement. So we're very familiar with what collaboration was, what communication was, critical thinking. We added empathy, learner's mindset, perseverance, which took a little more, explaining and articulation. What changed is when we, after year 1, brought our faculty and staff into the process and started thinking through with our teams at each building, how can we really talk about these competencies coming alive in the classroom? And that process was probably the least clear, maybe the most messy and confusing at first. But once we established design teams in each building, once we were able to articulate those competencies in action through some learning progressions, it started to take hold, not just as a statement to the community that we stand for collaboration, but what would that look like in a classroom? And how do we do this without adding change on top of change on top of change? How can we take our current curriculum instructional model and weave into it truly some meaningful experiences from a learning and teaching standpoint that bring these alive? And that really came through teacher leaders. If you want to talk about distributed leadership and a organization that you want to really bring change alive, for us, I would say it was teacher leaders with our building principals that stepped up through the design team process and to think about over the next 3 years, how can we bring the portrait of talent competencies alive in the classroom? It can be seen, observed, and understood. And from our visit from the League of Innovative Schools last year, we received tremendous feedback that what was happening in the classroom when it came to a kind of vertical alignment of competencies in action, what was happening. It was occurring in tangible ways beyond what we probably had expected even a year before that.
That's right. Yeah, I was lucky to be on that visit, and the energy was palpable for sure. But Britt, would you mind going to the next slide on the design teams? Can you talk a little bit, Michael? So you have multiple campuses, and you had this orientation around the portrait, which helped to create clarity, and you had engaged some early adopters, and you did some PD around them, and then you identified the big moves, and now you move into design teams. And how did this work? Each school picked their focus area, or what emerged through this school-based design team process?
Well, that's where I think that it's important to think about when you're trying to kind of energize and bring change alive, is we didn't dictate or demand certain tasks be completed. What we really said was, we want you to form a viable design team working with your building leadership at the 5 schools. And you, as a team, think through what's something you're passionate about that you could see as an actionable first step in bringing this forward into a meaningful experience. So it was a lot of flexibility and kind of creative design work done at each building with the expectation that there would be true, measurable, viable competencies in the classroom occurring through that design team process. So yeah. It was broad. And you can see just from these examples from the elementary schools and how they brought it alive, particularly through our portrait puppies, which was an incredible idea of bringing competencies alive through individual puppies that represented each of these competencies, including the stuffed animal dogs, which I had behind me, but someone came and borrowed them this morning.
They're in demand.
Props gone. Again, this was all teacher design team created concepts. And we allowed that flexibility. What we've seen happen since then is cross-pollination between the design teams who have come together and worked. We actually did that earlier this summer to, get our action steps for this year, that there's natural crossover happening without us dictating that between the teams. So a range of ideas developmentally appropriate for each level naturally seem to occur.
Yeah, I love it.
Process.
And, we've talked in the series about how sometimes a tendency for leaders to try to protect themselves by being very prescriptive about how to do a particular kind of change. And I've experienced this myself, where it's, feels like it's high stakes and it feels like it needs to be done a particular way. And what you're describing, though, is a sense of clarity around the outcomes that need to be achieved, some design constraints, and then empowering others, or actually like promoting the creative flexibility of others to to take ownership. And what they came up with is probably something that exceeds what you would have done if you had sat in your office and done it on your own. And so let's look at the next slide, Britt, so people can see a little bit of, what that looks like in practice. And maybe talk through, Michael, quickly, like if you just walk through your schools now, what do you see on a regular day?
Well, what you'll see in most every classroom is kind of a whiteboard that teachers are capturing in real time when they're addressing some of the competencies within specific learning progressions. That's now very common. It kind of dovetails often, with other expectations of essential questions in the classroom that we'll see. And then you'll see evidence of it in the work that students are completing, and they're able to articulate how they are actually seeing perseverance being used in their work. They can explain that now in a real dynamic way. And what's we found is exciting is the through line from elementary to middle school to high school. You can see the evidence of it. Now it looks different. It looks different at all levels, but this idea of a common language with the portrait competencies, and expectation, and understanding that I have the freedom to make this happen in my classroom, in my lesson, in a different way. Yes, but it's going to happen. And I would say what we've seen here is tremendous collaborative competition. A term we use here frequently that, as I think all of you see with educators, is educators have a lot of pride, a lot of drive, and a lot of passion. And when they see other educators doing some great work, all it does is inspire them to do more and to share ideas. That's what we've seen here. And it's just what you said, Devin, by allowing some of that freedom, keeping the expectation high and giving some direction, it has exceeded our expectations in the way that this dynamic change has happened with our competencies and our portrait work, beyond what I think we expected to see in a year. We have to give time and space and attention to those teams with professional support and training and coverage, but not a tremendous amount of financial resources other than giving them the time and the space and the professional courtesy to do the heavy lifting and build the capacity.
Love it. And so going back to the learner-centered leadership model, you have a clear sense of purpose. You're engaging participation broadly. You're using feedback along the way to help make progress. And one of the things that I love about the Hampton story and the success that you've had is there's this narrative about public education that we can't change, that like it's just too rigid, change isn't possible. And your experience is it is possible. It happened in a fast, like a relatively short amount of time. And so, just want to give you major kudos for the success that you've had and he's had. And want to also bring in Lori's journey because she's had a similar level of success, slightly different community, different entry points, but hopefully you also notice some themes as we hear from Lori. So Lori, tell us a little more about Lamont and how you got started in this learner-centered journey.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some similarities there. And thank you, first of all, for giving me the opportunity to share our story. As I stated earlier, Lamont is in Kern County in the Central Valley. So we're 2 hours north of Fresno, 2 hours south of LA. So you can kind of, put us in a spot there to know where we're at. We are a preschool through eighth grade school district. With 4 schools and approximately 2,600 students. We actually are declining enrollment. which is a little scary, but that said, is, you know, where the best thing to bring in enrollment is to know that you're doing great things and people are hearing about us, and so excited about that. But my journey started a little different in Lamont. This is my 4th year as superintendent here, 8th year as a superintendent. But I came into a district that had, Michael talked about traditions, lots and lots and lots of traditions. But I walked in and said, I'm going to, hold my 100-day journey. And through my 100-day journey, I came up and did lots of opportunities. My own personal framework is the Listen, Learn, Lead, Love framework. Lots of listening and learning about what was going on. And I learned about the fact that we had about 18 overarching themes that were needs from everyone that I was able to connect with my first 100 days. And it really goes to giving that voice, as you talked about earlier, Devin, finding some coherence. What was the coherence or lack thereof that was taking place in Lamont? I did the Darcy. I had to lead, because whether you want to or not, you have to make those decisions, based on what has to happen while you're leading the district. But then through my love is where I built that trust. And you try to bring in coherence and efficacy in that way. But I called in on LCC because as a superintendent, one of the biggest things about leadership is distributed leadership. And I did not want to be the one leading the work, but I wanted to sit amongst everyone else. And so we formed a 65 plus guiding coalition where I brought in teachers, I brought in students, I brought in leadership, classified staff, certificated staff, parents, community members, anyone from within the community, and my board. And so we got together throughout the year, went over those 18 overarching themes that I had started with. And then we completely redid our mission, our vision, and our values. And that was so important because as a superintendent, it was really hard for me to lead when both the vision and the mission did not match what our parents wanted for the future and our teachers wanted, the community wanted, for the future of our students. And so we started there, and then we formed our framework for the future, which was amazing. And that framework for the future is really a strategic plan that goes until 2030. And so really setting up the district, for that future and for the needs of our students. It was really important for us. And for me, that was one of those lead decisions, which was to call it a learner profile. And the reason why is because I did not, we ended 8th grade here in this district, but I want our kids to know that they need to continue. And so the why outcomes, the students will in the blue there, it was so important to ensure that every learner would come out with each one of the competencies or tenets, as we call them. And each one is really built on what our kids need based on who we have. It was also really important for me to center on the fact that we do have a high, 96% socioeconomically disadvantaged. 96% of our students are Hispanic, and then there 43% are English learners. But what's also important about my district is we have a DLI, so dual language immersion. And so I wanted something that was going to work for both, students that are learning in Spanish or learning in English, but we can translate those competencies to be effective for both. And it worked out beautiful. And then our learning model, kind of to Michael's point, it's irregardless of what program we have in front of you, it's the learning model and how you utilize, those instructional practices and that pedagogy to ensure that you have what the kid, what you need students to learn, and how teachers will utilize their practices effectively for. And we do a lot of professional training, professional learning for our teachers. And it's important to note that, yes, we continue to do that because that's the only way you're going to have collective efficacy if you're all grounded in the same. And so we always lead with that no matter whom we bring in. And then our pillars of success, it was really important for me to really help my board understand that, as a superintendent, to sit in front of the dais and recommend any kind of purchase or any kind of implementation, it has to be grounded in something. And so having them as part of the guiding coalition was so important. And so we landed on the 4 pillars of success, and each one now has work streams underneath that will get us into that specific goal. And anytime we purchase anything, we say, we consider anything, it has to be able to sit within these pillars of success. And it really allows for us as a leadership team to be completely connected, right? There's that collective efficacy even amongst leaders, in that we know what our goals are, and if it doesn't fit within here, then we have to analyze our practice. Is like, are we sitting within the correct one? Are we doing what's
Right.
best for children? And it's another really important thing about you'll see and notice about our pillars of success is the culture, community, and climate. The biggest output that I got from didn't matter who from from the guiding coalition, it was that community is important. Lamont is an unincorporated rural community, and our district truly serves as the hub of the community. And so we had to make sure that our students understand how important coming back to their community and giving back to the community is. And so this has been just a transformative component to our district. We're seeing gains already, small gains, but those gains are huge. And so really excited about our move forward.
One thing to jump in here, Lori, that really strikes me about this is when we talk about distributed leadership in both what Michael shared and what you're sharing, the sense of purpose is so important. And the guidance and clarity that emerges once you have agreed, like where you're going, what are the outcomes that are most important? What does powerful learning look like? What are our commitments as a community, and how does that reflect the values of our each of us as individuals, but also collectively? Like those agreements help people to move in a common direction, and they help people to move fast because they know where they're going and how they're going to get there. And so you then, once you had the framework in place, you then started to engage a variety of different constituencies. And so, yeah, talk to us a little bit about the advisory groups and what you did with your leadership teams as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you just said, Devin, because it's been really neat to sort of watch how my entire team will address anyone, or if they want to invite anyone in. It's like, here's our framework. If you don't match this, if you cannot give us what this is asking, then you're not invited in. And it seems a little harsh, but the reality is we have to be protective, because you can't have collective efficacy if you're not bringing in people that are going to be owning that, and so it's really important. But yeah, we built in some advisory groups because it's important to also recognize that you're going to have some naysayers. You're going to have those that are reluctant. You're going to have those that don't understand it, or they're just scared because it seems different. And so you bring them in different capacities to be able to help them. The Guiding Coalition was anyone, right? Anyone that wanted to be part of this, they took place in that. And it was such a great way for a new superintendent and coming into a new community, into a new district, into a new county, to be able to meet so many people. And so that was amazing. The Framework Advisory Team was, after we created this framework, now we had to dig into, okay, what is it that we're saying that each one of these competencies is about? What, how are we going to reach these goals? And then they are also those that are ready to go and say, okay, here's this learner profile. I'm ready. I understand. I'm excited about this. Help me become better. And so that team was fantastic. Lots of laughing, lots of engagement. You can see them there in that picture there, at how they're truly learning. And we're all sitting there learning as to what are the best practices to make sure that our learner profile comes to life. Our work streams group, as I said earlier, each one of our pillars of success has different. Some of them have 2 work streams. Some of them have a 3. Some have 1. So it sort of depends on the work. I'm actually opening up a new one this year, which is our AI, right? Artificial intelligence is so important. So someone becomes the lead on that, and then we form a team. We look at the goal. What is the ultimate? What is going to make that goal actually a reality? And then it's backwards mapping on what we have to do to make it work. And we do different things. So we're redoing our evaluations. We're looking at our report cards. And then report card's a great one. We already have a standards-based report card, but was it really a standards-based report card? But we had to learn to go backwards, and then we ended up looking at different things. So just great work on that. And then my framework council is new. That's coming up this year. And they're the people that, the teachers that are a little like, what does that really look like? What, how do I implement the learner profile and still feel like I've got some assistance in because I still have a little fear in how to let go, but it's moving forward in an amazing way. My framework advisory, you can see here our big moves for each one of the pillars of success. You'll see where it is that we want to go, and then what we're going to do for each one. One of the biggest one is our whole child success for all students and redefining our MTSS model. And looking at what is it that our students need to be able to foster that broader measure of success and understanding what they need. In terms of investing in our team, we're really looking at what are the appropriate job descriptions that meet our needs. What are those evaluations that really are going to hone in on the teachers and what they're doing, and not necessarily looking at things that don't make sense anymore. So, we have really old evaluations, especially for a classified. Looking at our crosswalk with the CSTPs in California, our standards, and then the development of a teacher development. And so super excited about the work that we've got there. Our culture, community, and climate. Making sure that our families are aware of what we're doing and helping them really learn that model themselves. So these are some of the big moves that we're making, and we're going to continue to make them, and excited about what's to come.
Yeah. One thing, that's important, I think, to elevate in what you're sharing is sometimes when people hear terms like learner-centered, or they think about distributed leadership, they might presume that means like people do whatever they want. And part of what you're making clear in what you've shared is there's a clear sense of purpose that's based on a collaborative co-design process, but you also have systems and structures that engage your constituencies in different ways to make sure that you're not just talking about what you want to see, you're actually doing move to it. And so if I could kind of jump to one of those big moves is a micro school, which you've launched. Would you mind talking just for a minute or two about how this is sort of manifesting in different school structures as a result of the systems that you put in place?
Sure. If I can go very quickly to your point, Devin, in my leadership development, nothing speaks more than that. When I realized that my leaders needed professional learning as well, because what was happening is that the stories, what they were going back to their site was not always consistent. So now they completely planned together. Now it doesn't matter what school site you're at, the teachers all know, oh, okay, they're doing the same thing in this school and that school. And it really sends a clear message about systems and structures and purpose. Yeah, we had the opportunity. We got very, very fortunate and got a grant to start and launch a micro school at one of our elementaries. And what this basically did is it sort of gave us the opportunity to launch 100% fully into our learner profile with at a school site. And it's a 4-6 school site with a staff, with a team here that truly was going to embrace the learner profile, the competencies within each one, and then not be tied down with this feeling like they had to follow a page by page on an adoption, because it wasn't about a curriculum. It was about the instructional practices. It was about the pedagogy. It was about what was right for kids to give them those hands-on opportunities, and then break norms. That was the biggest one. What do you mean we don't have to have recess all, at this time? What do you mean that you're in 4th grade and I can send my kids to 6th grade to work together? Wait, what? All 295 kids in the same room at the same time? Yes. And so when they kept hearing me say yes, yes, yes to this, their minds were just blown. My principal grew so much in her role as a principal and someone in distributed leadership because she was one with her team. And it just really allowed them to grow so much and just gain the knowledge of what we really truly mean to be learner-centered, but be centered on our profile and then those competencies within each one. You see a little picture of them there. We were able to launch so many other different things with that program. My favorite, of course, is the student exhibition. So after having these huge units that they completed, students got to share, and you see the one there with the paramedic, where students got to share what they learned, and they got to exhibit their learning in any way they wanted to. So some did a puppet show, some did a video show, some did a report. But to be able to give students the opportunity to demonstrate their brilliance, nothing comes close to that. And so this micro school is really amazing. And this year we actually are launching, I don't know if that's the next slide, but we're launching at the middle school. We launched an entire elective on just our learner profile. It's on the go. So our teacher is one of the ones that was in the framework advisory, and he's building the classroom as he goes, where he's giving students the opportunity to really center on the competencies of the learner profile, but himself as a teacher on our PACE model and what that learning model looks like. And it's super exciting to see that happening in action. And then he will be on my AI work stream, so he'll be able to start incorporating what we learn and gain from there as well. So you can kind of see where things sort of play together and come together.
It's really exciting to see. And again, if people believe that change can't happen in public school systems, they should go visit Lamont, they should go visit Hampton, they should see that anything is possible when we approach it with intentionality and with collaborative spirit and effective distributed leadership. So many things to celebrate. I do want to, before we go into breakouts, I do want to also kind of just recognize, and you mentioned this briefly, Lori, like it's not all rainbows and puppies in the journey. Like change is hard and it confronts a lot of historical things, your traditions, your resource constraints. There's all sorts of the dynamics that can make it challenging. So I wonder, Michael, if I could have you start and just talk a little bit about what were some of the challenges in the journey and how did embracing distributed leadership help you to move through those challenges? Oops, and you got to hit the mute. There we go.
Yeah, got it now. Yes, that's a great question. No, it's heavy lifting. There's no question about it. And there's difficulty both, I think, on the engagement of the right individuals to help drive the change. That probably is, I think, one of the key factors. And I would say here in Hampton, we look beyond the traditional leaders. And I think some of those teacher leaders that the teacher and faculty respected made all the difference. They would much rather hear it from a colleague that's trying something new and knows it works than the superintendent. And I'd say some of the challenges we had here, we have a very kind of experienced and stable faculty that trusts each other. The community trusts them, probably maybe a little more than me. And so the teachers in some way had to lead the way for that change to really be embraced by the community. That's some of the challenges we face, is that there was traditional ways of doing things that had been very successful at Hampton for a long time. I remember, never forget, I came and we 10 years ago we wanted to go 1-to-1, and I had to call parents, say we came to Hampton because it was a paper pencil district, and we so there's that dynamic. Fortunately, we are a reasonably well resourced community, but that doesn't automatically translate into change and dynamic and new ideas. So
your point about like who carries the message reminds me early in my admin career, I remember reading a study that said that community members believe custodians and office staff members more than they believe principals and superintendents. And the rationale was, these are people that they see everything. They know what's really happening, and they don't have any reason to be disingenuous about what they say. And so, yeah, there are many, many influencers in our educational communities, and sometimes we forget to include them in the change process. And when we do forget to include them, it makes it so much harder to move as a community. And it sounds like part of what worked for you was thinking about who are the key people to include at various moments in the journey, which is critical. Lori, I wonder, before we go into breakouts, maybe you could talk about challenges and how distributed leadership helped to overcome those challenges.
Yeah, I think the challenges were, unfortunately, when going back to when I started, we were in a situation where our scores were not where they needed to be. And so you got identified by the state as, below average. And it's not a place where you want to start, and it's not the end all be all, but it is how we're looked at. And so it gave us that opportunity to really dig into the data. And I'm really big about saying I don't like the term, data drives your instruction or data drives. I don't like that, because for me, when I drive, I have a destination and I know which way to go, although there's different places. I say it guides, because
Sure.
you need to be able to kind of go around. And so that's just like a little philosophical thing on my end. But what
Yes.
I paired that data with the Future of Jobs report, which at the time was to 2025. And when I shared that with staff at my welcome back, it was like, look, this is what the current jobs need. So we can't continue to not serve our kids to be prepared for the future. And so I think by engaging everyone whenever I could was one of my ways of really trying to get to those, difficult times. Very transparent. I have Friday communication to staff, and I put things out there to them, and then inviting those into the guiding coalition that were part. Some were all about it, and some were not, as they say. And so you have to have those conversations. And what's amazing is that those people that were in my guiding coalition, who were not 100% in line with it at the start, are my biggest proponents now, because they've seen what it can do for children. Just last year we celebrated 130 years in this district. So something has gone right for 130 years, but what do we need to do now to prepare for 130 to go? And so that's kind of been my platform with our teachers, and for those that have a difficult time with it, is we're not teaching for us. We were already in those seats. We're teaching for those of tomorrow. So if those practices didn't work well, what do we need to do to change? But I can't do that without empowering you. So I think the other component to those that have a difficult time with this is empowering them with knowledge and trainings. And so lots of professional development, lots of inclusion, lots of conversations with board. My presentations during the board, we talk about these things. Those are all important. So I think transparency, opening their doors to what is to come in the future as a superintendent. I feel that that's where I have to sit, right? I have to be able to look beyond the door and then guide my staff in that direction. But bringing them in and showing them it's fun, sitting with them and not knowing how to do something, and laughing with them, that's important, because they see you as a human being as well. And I think, as Michael probably knows, and Devin, too, the minute they add that superintendent to the back of your name, all of a sudden you're this different person. Like, no, I'm still Lori, and it's important for them to see that, and be reminded that you also were in that classroom. And that failure is okay. And I don't call it failure. You try it, and you keep going. So I think those have all been my strategies.
Lessons. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, and there's so many things I could go back to. You're like reinforcing the why frequently is really important. Also, I've done a lot of research on relational trust, and when you talk about transparency and vulnerability, there's a lot of evidence that well-timed sharing of information, whether it's perceived to be positive or negative information, builds trust. And it sounds like that's part of the rhythm and just, yeah, showing your humanity. And so we're going to go into breakouts in a moment. But one thing I want to say before I turn it back over to Brittany is another insight that I hope is clear from this conversation is, you know, Hampton and Lamont are two very different communities in a lot of ways. You know, Michael talked about this tradition of excellence and you know, highly stable, fairly well-resourced community with a reputation for success. And Lori talked about coming in and, you know, being identified as an underperforming system and, you know, not having quite as many financial resources. And regardless of those conditions in both of these communities, people have come together and they have had conversations about their hopes and dreams for the future, and they've worked together to create better experiences for learners. And as a result, you know, it's good for the kids, it's good for the students for sure, it's good for the adults in the system, but it's good for communities and it's good for all of us as a society. And again, change is possible. It's happening in public school systems, it's happening in communities across the United States. And the last thing I want to say is it takes courageous leaders who are willing to embrace the process and trust others. And I'm just super grateful for Michael and for Lori for helping to be models of what that learner-centered leadership looks like. So with that, I'll get off my soapbox. I'll turn it over to Brittany for next steps. But thank you to Michael and to Lori. I appreciate you both.
Well, I hope I'm not out of line and speaking too broadly for all participants, but I feel like I could have listened to you all talk for hours. That was invigorating. And in the spirit of being learner-centered, we want to carve out time for our webinar participants to make meaning of what we just learned. So we're going to hop into breakout rooms. And just like always, two goals of the breakout rooms. The first is to connect, make meaning, and start to flesh out what are your next steps? Where do you want to go? What big moves might you make? To whom might you distribute leadership? And then the second is what questions might you want to ask Michael and Lori? So when we come back from breakout rooms, please feel free to share those questions in the chat or in the Q&A tool. But we're going to come back together in about 10 minutes or so. I'll give you a nice chunk of time to debrief in breakout rooms. We'll come back together in 10 minutes. See you all soon. Welcome back, everyone. I hope I didn't interrupt any amazing productive conversations. Hopefully that little 2-minute reminder or alert that the breakout room was going to close allowed you to finish up any final thoughts. But as always, we just want to open up the floor for questions for our panelists. Oh, yes, please. Here, it seems like Chantel says that Bill had something to share. So please, Bill, do finish that thought.
Chantel and I got into a conversation around how we have to create safe environments for people to take risks and to engage in the challenge. And so that was what we were talking about when we got cut off. And the idea that part of that creation of safety is understanding, particularly when you're looking at data, that data tells us all sorts of things. And we have to get away from this is good and this is bad. And we have to understand that this data describes us. And the stuff that we can celebrate, we'll celebrate. The stuff that we need to work on, we need to work on. But we can't shy away from the stuff we need to work on because we think of it as bad. We have to engage in it. And if we really truly have a growth mindset, then that's just one more thing that we want to change and we want to improve. And I think that goes towards creating that feeling of safety. Like, I'm not going to be mad at you if this data isn't where we want it to be. Instead, I'm going to say, okay, what are we going to do to change it? And those are two different approaches. And the latter is the type that creates a safe environment.
Bill, I think my favorite thing about what you just said is that I can apply that in my mind to a district-wide system, but I can also apply that to a teacher and a student in the classroom. Like that psychological safety, that risk-taking, a safe place to take a risk, try something new. It goes from the smallest grain size all the way up to the district level. I love it.
Yeah, and for kids and adults too, right? I think
Yes.
sometimes we focus on kids feeling safe, which is really, really important, but your grown-ups need to feel safe if you're going to show growth as well.
I wholeheartedly agree. Oh, I'm so glad that you jumped in and shared that. Chantel, thank you for the prompt for him to finish that thought. Based on your conversation, please feel free if you'd like to pepper our panelists with some questions. We've got time, and then after Q&A, we will start to wind down. So I wonder if in your conversation, were there any wonderings that you had for Michael and Lori?
Hello, good evening, friends. Thank you very much for such a wonderful presentation for today's webinar on distributed leadership. Actually, my name is Oigo Gaunu, and I have this challenge that resonated with today's presentation. I think among the breakout session and even on this platform. That issue of teacher leader having to face certain obstacles as regards innovative programming for school growth to the benefit of the learners. I can see that LCC is really giving that supportive role. From this webinar series, I've been able to see that it's clearly evident. But my own concern is that I find out that the challenge is over there and in Africa and across Europe is that there is no systemic. Wondering if there could be a kind of a personalized committee, more like each school to a committee coordinated by because most times these obstacles, these barriers, these challenges, but are not really known by the education board. So what do you think as panelists, do you think would that kind of structure really come to play? Because I've been ideating all this while that if the Ministry of the Education Board can take control using organizations like LCC to specify certain committees that can focus on particular schools, okay, so that that feedback mechanism can help for data planning, that is decision making by the education authorities. This question is kind of large, but I just want to hear your perspectives. If such a framework can help accelerate this systemic change that we really need. LCC is doing a great work, but how can the government work with such organizations as LCC to dish out certain committee system particular to a particular school, especially those left behind? What do you think, panelists? Thank you very much.
Michael, you want me to take this one?
Sure.
Well, we can both go on. Thank you, first of all, for the question. I think the first thing that comes to mind based on your question is that it's a perfect opportunity for any organization to work with an outside agent, because you would, in my case, I prefaced it with the fact that I wanted a seat at the table. I didn't want to be the table. And sometimes when you're the one that's always leading, you don't get to hear all the voices. So when you sit at the table, you're able to be amongst everyone else, and then your thoughts come out just as much as anyone else. And so everyone's being validated and everything gets vetted. And having an outside source come into your system, they also give you a good perspective of what's happening, because you're not dishonoring what's taking place. You're honoring what's taking place, and then you're enhancing it. So it's also your approach on how and what you tell those that are your leaders or whoever supervises you in terms of the establishment, the organization. It's about, let's honor what we have. Let's look what is working and not working, and then let's enhance it. And it's really giving you the in with new practices. That's the one thing about LCC as well, is that you have amazing people that are working within the system that have effective knowledge of what's happening now. So current pedagogy, current research, and that's really important. And then you're connected to other leaders. Like Michael and I met 2 years ago. He knows that if I needed something, I can call him, and vice versa. And so you really bring yourself, give yourself the opportunity to work with other leaders to give you, their perspective and ideas of what can take place. So I think it's 100% doable. I think you could do it. And I think that it really gives you the opportunity again to dig deep into your own practices and your own background of your district and then move forward.
Yeah, we experienced this as a follow-up. There's something that happened here in Western Pennsylvania within our state that might be in some ways transferable to the question that you're posing around bringing different agencies or districts together to try to solve for good or for growth. I would think the first thing would be, is there a standard amongst those different organizations or ministries of education that there was a set of core standards of learning that would be acceptable to all? Here we have standards in Pennsylvania. Lori has different standards in California, but in some ways they set a standard for outcomes. I think if there was an agreement on that amongst the different ministries, and then you allow just what Laura is talking about, you bring into that conversation then a group of different schools or different communities. We did that here in Western Pennsylvania through an innovation cohort, so that there were teacher leaders from multiple districts participating in a cohort together. All those districts had the same end goal, which was a certain standard of learning, student learning. But those districts then collaborated with LCC, the Learning Center Collaborative, around the conversations, how do we get there? And what we saw was that these different schools, the different communities, saw different ways of getting there. So that would be my take on it, is bringing folks together, just as Lori said, within that group discussion and idea sharing, you're going to make progress. But great to have those kind of a common standard of where are we going, what's the end in mind, amongst different, if it's ministries of education or different constituencies, so that you have something to all work towards. That's probably more of the challenge in some ways. Those are my thoughts.
And I'll chime in with a theory that I would love the opportunity to test. But so far in my 7 years with LCC, I've had the luxury of partnering with tiny schools, districts, and even states. And as you heard from Dr. Lawhead, multiple districts within states. And what's so exciting is that no matter the context, this approach works. So there's no reason, I don't have a reason yet to believe that could go to an even larger grain size, and you could be looking across, nations, or, more globally. I think, honoring the local context, getting really clear on what your community wants and needs from education, and then bringing people together to figure out what school needs to look like to get to those outcomes. It doesn't matter if it's within a school, within a city, within a state, within a nation. It's a conversation worth having. And so, yeah, however we can help, please let us know, because we would love to help accelerate that work for you from afar. Although I would love an excuse to come visit you.
Me too.
Yes, yeah, we all should go on a field trip. I think let's make a worldwide tour. We'll rent a cruise ship or something and just sail about and go see all the amazing schools all over the world. Well, with that, I cannot believe we are down to just a few minutes left in our final webinar session of this series. So I'm going to close us out. I would encourage you all to think about your next steps that you discussed in your breakout room. And these next steps can be lofty, they can be small, they can be sending an email, or they can be revising a whole policy. But share with us what you're taking away from this webinar series. What do you have planned next? And as you're putting that in the chat, I'm going to pull up just the last couple of bit of slides to close us out. All right, as you're reflecting on those next steps, I want to share a little bit more specifically. Actually, Oyegoga asked such a great question about how LCC or other nonprofits can help. So maybe it would be helpful for me to share a little bit about the way we approach our work. And the lion's share of our work, most of what we do, is the bottom of this pyramid. It's deep partnerships, be them with schools, districts, states, regions. But in addition to that, as Lori and Michael talked about, we also really are committed to networking and bringing people together, and as well as field building. So what we learn in our deep partnerships, we try to share in free and open ways, like in this webinar or in the resources that we share online. And then we can bring all of that impact back into our deep partnerships. So we have a multi-tiered strategy that includes not only partnering with schools and districts and states, but also connecting folks all from all corners of the globe. So speaking of networking and connecting you with free resources, please don't sleep on learnercenter.org. There are so many tools, so many podcasts, articles, case studies, resources, playbooks, white papers, you name it. It's all freely available at learnercenter.org. Strongly encourage you to go check out the learning tab. I think it's called Learn and Network. Lots and lots of information there, and we continue adding to it every week. So speaking of free experiences, we experience this 4-part webinar series, but we really hope that the learning does not end here. We'd really like to continue learning from these incredible leaders like Contessa from Kentucky and Chad from Laguna Beach. You see all of these incredible leaders that we've heard from throughout the series. If you want to stay connected with these incredible leaders, please know that you are more than welcome to dive in and learn more about our ecosystem at an upcoming event. So we've got a webinar on school design in September. Again, that's free. It is an online experience. If there were ideas when it comes to school design that you pulled from this webinar that you'd like to have your team learn more about, maybe it's not a 4-part series, it's just a 1-hour webinar, so it's more of a taster, but definitely a great place for you to join us. We've got some in-person convenings coming up in October. We will be in North Dakota visiting Northern Cass School District. They've done incredible work with competency-based learning and personalized learning. So we'll be visiting schools as well as visiting an industry partner. So if you'd like to join us on that trip, please feel free to reach out. We'll also be in New Orleans at Full Scale Symposium, which used to be the Aurora Institute Symposium. And in November, we'll have another webinar on big moves. Again, we talked about big moves a little bit in this series, so if that's something you'd like to learn more about, feel free to register. All of those are easy to access and no charge to attend. And with that, as you are sharing your feedback, I just want to express immense amount of gratitude to Lori and Michael and all of our incredible panelists, but also to our tried and true dedicated participants who hung with us through 4 weeks of learning. You asked incredible questions, and it's just really fun to create a micro community with you all. We really look forward to continuing the conversation, and I hope to see you soon. Thanks, everybody.